The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. Today, we're on the second part of a trilogy. This one we are calling Counselor Jean. I told the story in last week's episode, but I'll give you a little refresher on it. This one's not in any of the books, so this is the only place you'd hear this story. Um, Jean brought a story in a dream about 5 years ago, not quite that, but close to it. And in it, he showed me being in the lobby of a hotel with a crowd of people who were all registering for a conference, an academic conference or professional gathering that they were arriving at. I've been to plenty of those. I've even organized some of them. So I'm in a setting that's kind of familiar. He said he was making small talk with someone else who it was probably a colleague that he was just meeting casually as they were getting registered. And suddenly shots rang out. He was hit. And as it happened, he was fatally wounded. And as he was falling to the ground, he was saying, "God bless them, God bless them, God bless them." And I awoke. Well, when my prayer partners and I got into prayer to see how we could help this person, um, we learned that the conference was counselors of different kinds. So psychologists, psychotherapists, um, people that help other people through their struggles with one academic background and discipline or another. Um, the work that my prayer partners and I do, we only do that after we go into protected prayer. Um, we pray to St. Michael the Archangel, Mary, the Mother of Jesus, St. Dominic, patron of the order I belong to, St. Benedict, a number of holy ones, holy men and women, and the angels, and then we go in and do our work. Well, um, his angel explained that he was well educated and very well spoken and ready to make a move from this kind of therapeutic level to a next afterlife plane, and that we would find him very cooperative. So as it turned out, one of the prayer partners who originally was part of this story was Karen, who is a marriage and family counselor and psychoanalyst. So she felt a kinship with Jean because of their shared profession and the values and passions that get expressed in wanting to help people who are dealing with a lot of interior pain. Well, um, Jean said that he didn't know the person who shot and killed him, that it's true that his first impulse was to feel like whoever just did this is probably in a world of hurt. And I said, "God bless them, God bless them, God bless them." And he said, "My dying was very rapid." But then he awoke in an afterlife setting where he said it was a very well provisioned healthcare setting and he said it had bothered him as a practitioner of mental health that so many people who need it can't get to it because they can't afford it, because so many people get their health insurance through their employment and not every job offers that kind of benefit. Anyway, he told us that um, he had a little bit of that kind of what if thinking that we might do if only he had taken a different cab from the airport, if this or that other odd thing might have happened, he wouldn't have been in the wrong place at the wrong time for this shooting to end his life. But he said, I also knew very well that people can make their lives more difficult than they need to be with a lot of that kind of thinking. And that he knew that it's really best to stay in the present moment and work with the present information and data. So He didn't spend very much time on that kind of thinking. He just said, there are times when very mentally disturbed people turn their anger on a counselor who they feel failed them. And he referenced the plot line of The Sixth Sense, the movie starring Bruce Willis, where near the beginning of the movie, he's shot in his own house by a former counselee. And he said, Gene said, we knew that this kind of thing could happen. The chances of it were very rare, but it did happen to me, and I died. So I wouldn't say matter of fact, but he had his emotions, but he also sorted them, and and he said, I'm on the receiving end of the good care of caring people, and I want to cooperate with them as best I'm able. So he was determined to do that. So it turned out that he didn't spend an awful lot of time in this transitional space. And of course, our job is to help people from there into something a lot brighter, a lot with a lot more possibility uh, and and orientation toward the future about it. Well, this episode is that's the gist of what happened to him. He didn't give us information about family, marital status, where this took place, other than that it was somewhere in the U.S. Exactly when. We were only in this one little uh, piece of his story, and we did our part. We never tell any of these stories in a book or on a podcast without going back to that person and asking their permission to use their story. And so we got a lot more information when we did that not very long ago. He's a delight to talk to. Um, and, we remarked about the fact that how do you think it happened that in the instant that you were fatally wounded, as you were dying, you were saying, God bless them, God bless them, God bless them. And just, I'm kind of repeating myself, I suppose, but he just said, anybody that would have done that must have been in a world of hurt, and hurt people hurt people. And so he's just said, that's what I did in the moment. Um, so this one, because we call this compassionate response to this story, there's a couple of ways to look at that. One of them is as an objective viewer, like myself and you, as you get interested in this story, is once we hear it, what does it evoke in us, and how do we feel compassionately connected to Jean, the person who died in this story? That's one way of looking at it. Another kind of compassionate response is to um, look at the way the person who died this violent death reacted to it in the moment and in what they tell us came afterwards. Skipping kind of to the end, when it came time for him to move along, he said, well, I understood that I could have chosen just about anybody. At least I could have invited just about anybody. They'd be free to say yes or no. But he said, I could have invited some luminary in my field like Carl Jung. And I've seen people do that before. We've met plenty of what he called luminaries, plenty of famous people who were famous because of something that made them feel like the appropriate connector to the person we're helping pass. He said, I didn't choose to do that. I thought of a counselee named Ellie. She spelled her name Ellie. And he explained to us that he had counseled many people over the years, but that Ellie stood out in his mind because she was extraordinary for a few reasons. She had been through horrific childhood abuse. Um, I mean, I've dealt with plenty of people who've been through that, and I've done pastoral counseling with them. And you never have to compare one person's pain to another person's. I don't do that to myself either. But he said the amount of wounding that she went through early in life was very heavy. The thing he remembered about her was she was very determined to get the mental health care that she needed, and she prioritized it. She didn't throw up her hands and say, I can't afford it. She worked to afford it. And she knew the value of it and made it important. Now, Ellie was a young woman, I think probably maybe late 20s and 30s in the years that he was counseling with her, but she had lupus. Well, Gene said, I wasn't a medical doctor who could cure her lupus. I was working on her psyche and trying to help her be a freer and happier and mentally healthy person. But he said it always bothered me that, that lupus is an autoimmune disease, and it did make me wonder if there was a connection between the traumatic memory of things that she had gone through and the way that her body was tearing at itself, which is what happens in an autoimmune disease. He said, I don't know if there's a, a correlation between those two things. Um, but he said part of the reason I went to academic conferences was because I always wanted to see what the latest research was turning up. There were people studying all kinds of different questions, and they would get invited to present at conferences like this. And he said, I didn't want to be somebody who stopped their education in their college years and their master's or PhD years. He said, I wanted to keep abreast of things. That's why I went to these things. He said, so I still wonder about that. And he said, that's really not my place today to talk on that topic. So he left that alone. But he said, I wanted Ellie because um, she always stayed on my mind. Well, when Ellie showed up, she showed up as a healthy version of herself, a happy version of herself without lupus. And he said, and oh, by the way, I died of gunshot wounds, but I don't have to have bullet holes either. And then he compared himself to Jesus. And I don't know that, I think he was Christian. He at least knew the Christian story. And he said, Jesus shows up in some religious art after the crucifixion as a risen version of himself, but he still has the nail marks in the hands and feet inside. And he said he doesn't have to have those, but sometimes he used them for a higher purpose. He wanted to call attention to how violent his death had been and that all of it had been transcended and even made part of a holy story, as unholy as the events itself were. Well, he said, now I'm learning more about the body that I'm in and what it's capable of. And he said, I know that I can present myself in different ways. And Ellie is doing that for me. She's letting me know that she doesn't have lupus and that she's whole and healthy and happy. And she's excited and grateful that I sought her help. And she was grateful for the help that I gave her over the years. And she was sort of happy to return the favor. She was happy that I asked that she might accompany me on the next part of my journey. So that was kind of sweet. Um, one of the words that came up was empathy. And so because I'm a word guy, I looked it up. And I found that I was pretty sure the EM at the beginning meant is like in, to be in, and pathos has to do with suffering. So at a very basic level, the etymology of the word is to have inside feeling about something outside or something about another. Um, but I also learned that it has to do with, it has an application in the theory of art appreciation. Listen to this, that if there's an art piece in front of you that some artist has created for your viewing and your pleasure, um, to have empathy involves the viewer's ability to project one's personality onto the viewed object. So to not just stand there looking at a canvas, for example, but to allow your mind, heart, soul, being, consciousness to move in to the subject matter and perhaps into the mind and heart of the artist that labored to create this piece of art that you could then take part in and experience, to be empathetic to beauty, um, and 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 to take part in or commune with an artist who's trying to invite you into their world. I loved that. I studied art. That was one of one of the roads not taken as a career as an artist. Um, of course, it's related in some ways to the idea of sympathy. Um, so we're looking at when we express sympathy. for another, we're doing something similar. We know that they have suffered a loss of some kind, like we send a sympathy card upon learning of the death of someone's beloved. And we just want them to know that they're not alone in their suffering, that we somehow want to share in it, right? Um, which is not the same as feeling sorry for, pitying, or condescending. I'm going to talk a little bit about those. I was recently on the receiving end of a well-meaning condescension of somebody that wanted to um, communicate to me that they valued uh, an aspect of my life that we were talking about, um, but it felt on my end like somebody in a status above me looking down at me and condescending. That means to come down to be with, but to come down to be with and then return back to the status that you went to previously, which is apart from and above. That's condescension. Most of us don't like to be condescended to. It doesn't really feel the same as empathy. It's related, but doesn't feel the same. And I think a lot of people will say they don't want to be pitied for the same reason, because to be the object of pity might assume that the other person who pities you also thinks of themselves as in some way superior and um, has some sort of emotional response to your circumstance, but does so at a distance. Well, there was nothing about Gene that presumed distance, at least not in the way that we got to know him. How could you do that and be falling to the ground while you'd just been hit by bullets and saying, God bless them, God bless them, God bless them? He had an instant impulse that made him want to offer a blessing as he was dying. When we went into conversation with him towards getting his permission, he he said, "Well, I think the only reason that I would say no, and I'm not going to, but he said if I were going to say no, it would be only because I thought that that I might give scandal in some way or cause harm to people who already have been through my violent death, people who loved me that might find if they discovered my name and that was part of this whole process, that it would somehow harm someone." And he considered those, and then he eliminated the possibilities and said that's just not really the case. He said you might not be able to get all the way to the end of that and have 100% certainty, but there are a great many times in life where you have to do the best you can to gather the best information and then make a decision. And he said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say yes. He ended up touching Karen so much that she invited him into her heart, into her prayer life, and asked in particular that she had one particular client whom she said, upon first meeting him, that he had done a lot of really dark things, and that she was trying to help him as a therapist, but that over time she really grew to love him, and they were in a therapeutic counseling relationship for a long while. But she said, I just felt that he would be good to help me. So, but always before I would go into a session with this particular client, she said, I would call upon Gene in prayer and ask if he could be with me. And she said, I always felt stronger or more supported, or maybe I would be given some insight that perhaps he had a hand in bringing. Um, Catholic people often use the word devotion to describe that, usually of a saint, but it doesn't have to be. It could be of a holy soul, um, not a canonized person, but just somebody that adds light to the world. And so, so they were, he's speaking through me to her, but she had a few questions for him, and we learned that his guardian went by the name Otto, I think. Um, and that he said, my guardian doesn't need to be with me all the time anymore the way he had been before. And he said, and oh, by the way, they all know that when they are assigned to a human person, that human person is going to die. And so their job is not to prevent death because that's really not possible ultimately. And he said, so that really was off the table. But he said, I guess maybe it was Karen that asked, did did he have training to be Gene's guardian? And Gene said, well, I don't know exactly, when a consciousness is coming into existence, if there's some sort of pre-meeting to um, put the right angel with the right person. He said, it would seem to me that as a little person moves from out of the womb into early childhood and then later begins to demonstrate particular character traits that define them later in life, that there might be something of a mismatch. He said, if that were the case, I would imagine that that guardian would go to guardian school and kind of get caught up to speed and ask advice upon how can I do the very best job I can for this human consciousness who's somewhat different than I am. Um, he did say that he was very interested. They got him started on doing some counseling work in the afterlife, and and that his guardian would circle back around sometimes, he said, and say, you're working too hard. Let's go for ice cream, or let's do something fun. He accessed Karen's story. Karen loves pickleball, and Karen can hardly form a sentence that doesn't have the word pickleball in it. Sorry, Karen. But he said people, even really good counselors, have some um, hobbies or interests or things that have nothing to do with their work that add joy to their lives. And so they were telling me to make sure that I left time for leisure, even in the afterlife. And then he said, there's no earthly joy that doesn't have an afterlife corresponding joy. That anything that you can enjoy here, you can enjoy hereafter in some analogous way. Karen thought that was really cool. So do I. He said another thing that I was interested in was learning about the new body I was in and what it was capable of and what it wasn't. And when we're really little children, we're learning language, and we might be putting our foot in our mouth, or you know, learning to crawl and then stand and walk. Well, it seems to me that what Gene was saying is that process isn't as slow and belabored as it is when you're a baby, but there's things to be learned. And he said, I was interested in learning them, getting up to speed. One thing that he said was this: when we act according to our nature, we're going to be loving people. So he and I, Gene, were trained in the same way that God is love. God, the creator, creates only loving, loved beings, and that if only we will um, conform ourselves to the image of how we were created to begin with, we will have wholeness. So that we can get distracted and thrown off in the course of our life, but there's a core goodness in us because it's built into us. We're built of love. And so he said, when we act according to our nature, we're going to be loving people. That's loving as an adjective of the noun people. We're going to be loving people, where it's this next time, loving is a verb. We're going to be loving people, loving people. Well, I like that, and I'm going to remember it, and I thought I'd pass it along to you. Um, he said, as a therapist, um, remembering that we are all from love and are love, the work of a therapist isn't so much trying to get people to be a version of themselves that they've never been, to imagine some future way of being and then try to push them toward it. He said it's not so much that as trying to get people back to um, something fundamental about themselves that was there all along, that they're a loving person who is built to love. And he said, uh, it reminds me of mine. He said his story, his movie about, where is it? Up there, The Wizard of Oz. Um, that all we're trying to do is get them to be at home with their original goodness and their the love that brought them into being. So she said there really is no place like home, and a lot of times the work of a therapist is just helping people find their way home. Well, um, I really love this man, and I think uh, one of my other prayer partners who was present, Phil, was present to the conversation where he gave permission. And Phil injected that he said, I really love you. I think I've made a new friend, and I wonder if you would keep an eye on me and whether you would welcome me when I die. And I think Gene said something like, I don't know what I'll be doing at the time, but I want to be interrupted. I want to go on record is when your time to die comes, I want to be interrupted from whatever else I might be doing because I'd be honored to be a part of welcoming you. So I thought that was sweet. Well, that's what I have to say today about compassionate response to this story. Next time, we'll go into the third and final part of the trilogy that has to do specifically with spiritual practice. Um, Certainly, I'm going to want to comment upon how can we become somebody who, if we were to be shot and killed, would be offering a blessing to the shooter while we're falling. Man, I want that. But there's a lot of other things to unpack in his story that I think could be of spiritual benefit. So that's it for this episode. If you'd like to be in touch with me, remember that you can do that through my website, nathan-castle.com. Go to the uh, contact part. It will give you a drop-down menu that will ask you to give me your name, where you live, a phone number where I can reach you if you want to be reached by text or a phone call, um, and the time zone so that I only try to contact you at appropriate times. I always ask that if you have questions about the process that my prayer partners and I use, please read at least one of the books before we engage each other. That way, I think the conversation will be more beneficial. Um, and remember that I pray for you regularly. I'm about to go say Mass today, and I will remember you at the altar. When I pray for you, my favorite way of doing that is saying to God, you love these people who read what I write and listen to or view the podcast, and a lot of them have been through painful things. Would you touch them in the place that would be most healing? Is there anything that they need to transcend, move beyond, leave behind, so that they can go on? Or maybe, like Gene would have said, can they come home to themselves? Is there anything that's blocking their way home that this prayer might be beneficial, affect some change, that they can find that version of themselves that makes them a loving person, loving persons. So that's it for now. So thank you for being a part of this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan, wishing you well and hoping that you'll join us next time. God bless. Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.
Have you ever had to do something so difficult that you had to deal with it in stages? Imagine dying suddenly with no forewarning, being in a car crash, a shooting, a drowning. You leave your body, but then what? How do you transition into the afterlife? For some, it flows all at once, but not for everybody. For some, the process of transitioning into the afterlife is interrupted. Maybe there's a need for rest or for learning, or maybe just the chance to adjust to such an abrupt experience. I'm Father Nathan Castle. I'm a Catholic priest. About 23 years ago, the Holy Spirit began to send me people who had died traumatically. They entered my dreams during sleep, showing me what had happened to them and asking for help. They had died and moved on
sort of, but they'd come to a moment where it was time to complete the crossing. With the help of the angels and saints and earthly prayer partners, we've assisted more than 300 souls as they complete their crossing. You can read about it in my book series. Afterlife Interrupted books are available on Amazon. You can also learn more by visiting my website, nathan-castle.com. God bless you.